All right, so we're going to explore lesson 13.6 a little bit. So you can put your title down for 13.6, but then we're going to do a little exploration of it and figure out in what we're used to before we relate it to the math. So you have your title and your essential question. And now let's draw out a graph for the average daily temperature in Minnesota. So let's just start in January. What was it like in January? If this is 0 degrees, well, it definitely was chilly, so it starts out below 0. And it kind of sits down there for a couple of months, but then it starts warming up. And let's say that July is about here. So where does it kind of top out in July? Maybe up to, on an average, maybe what, 70, 75, 80, somewhere in there. Well, it goes up and stays up there for a little bit, but of course it goes back cold again. And so that might have been a little too cold. Maybe down to here for back to January again. But then the next year, it just does the same thing over again. And so on. So that's what our graph looks like. Okay, this is actually a trig function graph. It could be either sine transformed or cosine transformed. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Let's do another one. How about draw the level of water at a beach of an ocean? Okay, well we know that the water at the ocean has tides. So let's start it when the tide is, I don't know if we'd say like at a neutral tide where the tide's not in and it's not out. It would be at its regular level, so starting right here. And then the tide comes in, so the water comes up. Tide goes out, the water goes down. Tide comes in, the water goes up. Tide comes out, water goes down. And it just keeps making that cycle over and over and over again. How about the daily amount of sunlight in Alaska? Well, sometimes they have 24 hours of sunlight, and sometimes they have no sunlight. So they're going to go from 0 up to 24 hours. So let's start it in January. Well, it's actually December 21st or something like that, the winter solstice, equinox, whatever that word is. It's starting out with 0 amount of sunlight, but then by the time that it gets to June, that they're up to 24 hours. But then by the time it gets back to January again, it's back to 0. And back up, and back down, and back up. So that would be another example. All of these are examples of trig graphs. This one looks more like sine, and that one looks more like cosine. And we'll get into that a lot more coming up. How about the daily amount of sunlight in Mexico? Well, that one doesn't have 0 hours of sunlight, and it doesn't have 24. It's just pretty close to 12 all the time. It's not quite on the equator where they have exactly 12, but it's pretty close. So that means that it's going to be a little bit below it, a little above it, a little below, a little above. So it's going to rotate a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay, well, how about this one? Draw this horizontal axis down below, this stuff. What I want you to write is, when I rotate this red dot on the circle, moving your pencil from left to right, show me the distance from the x-axis. So if I'm going to rotate this like this, right here the distance is 0, but the distance is growing, 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 getting further away. But then it's getting closer and closer and closer and closer till it touches it and the distance is 0. But now it's got a negative distance, it's below it. And then it comes back up and it touches it. So it started at 0 right on it, and it went further away, and then touched it, and then down below, and so on. It can keep doing that. Okay, how about if I do it here? Well, this one, it's already started its maximum distance away, and it's going to get closer and closer and closer. Further and further, closer, closer, further and further. So it starts its furthest distance away up here, and it gets closer and closer, but then comes back up and down. If I keep rotating it, that's what it does. Well, what if we compare it to the y-axis? So how close is it? It's getting closer and closer and further and further. Closer and closer, further and further. But it started at its maximum distance away. So it starts up here, gets closer and comes back like that. What about this one where the dot is right on it? Well, that would start at 0, but this is going in the negative direction right away. And then over here. Okay, so this one starts here, but it went negative and then positive and then negative and so on. Okay, so that's just our little introduction of how to draw trade graphs. All right, and then here are the notes that you can copy down to go with this lesson. Let me find it. All right, so I've highlighted in yellow, green, and blue there what you need to copy down. All right, the unit circle, that's kind of what I was drawing there. So the unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1, centered at the origin. And that is how we use it. So the point, the x value is a cosine, y value is sine. And that's something that we've talked about before, that sine is always y, cosine is always x. And we encounter that again. All right, now if you look at this, we've seen this before. This is the different degrees and the radians, but then they also give you the sine and cosine values. This is not something we're going to need to write down because we are going to be able to figure it out by doing the 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 over 2, which was cosine. And then for sine, we added 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 over 2. We're going to just use that method to help us figure it out so we don't have to memorize that entire circle up there. And then here's a couple things just for you to read over. And that's as much as we're going to do in this video. The second video will have the examples.